classes kind of differently. How many people came here today and said, there's this garden guy's going to be there, and I have to ask him what? Anyone have a question before we even get started about anything? All right.
Are you still coaching chess?
You knew that?
Yes.
How did you know that?
Well, I
told
wanted
you
to know
that.
who you were, so I looked you up.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's one of my side projects. I've actually worked with plants and taught chess since the 70s. So like my whole life, yeah. So actually there's a new thing I do. This guy that I've been teaching chess, he owns a supplement company, and he made me the director of strategic marketing for his company, which means I teach the employees chess.
Best supplement of them all.
Yes. All right. I guess I'll stand right here. Whoops.
I'm not blocking your view.
I'll put that over here. All right, so what do you think this class is going to be about today? You have any idea?
How to grow things better.
How to grow things better. I like that. That's definitely my life mission. All right, so yeah, my name is Chuck McClung, and I have worked with plants my whole life, and I can talk about plants all day long because that's what I do every day. So just get me started and look out. But so when should I be done talking?
3.
What?
I'll give it a try.
2:20. 3:20. I mean.
Yeah, well, no, we'll be fine. I can. We'll
3:20.
fit it in. There's lots we can say, especially when we're talking about living beings. All right. So yeah, I've worked with plants my whole life, and a long time ago, I used to work in research for a few different universities, like the University of Montana, Oregon State, and a couple other ones. But I found when I was doing that, this was like in the 90s, is that I like working with plants and people a lot more than I like working with plants and politicians.
Oh, no.
So I stopped doing that. And but in the 90s, I was like, well, what am I going to do? And I was living in Bellingham, Washington at the time, and there was this really large independent family-owned garden center, a lot like Walter Anderson, but way bigger. And so I thought, I'll just get a job there. And I started working there right away, and you know, I had done more research, but here I am, like working with people, like one-on-one, with their garden questions, and I was just amazed at like the zeal with which people want to get their information about their plants. And you know, I didn't know. Like, I mean, I'd done gardening when I was a little kid for elderly people, and like broke a window at home accidentally. I had to go to my dad's friend's house and mow their lawn, do all that kind of thing. But I was really struck at how interested people are in plants, the people that are interested in plants. Like in my new book, there's a chapter called Black Thumb. And so if you have a friend that says, oh, I have a black thumb, what they're really telling you is they wish they didn't have a black thumb, because if they didn't care about plants, they wouldn't say they had a black thumb, right? Anyway, so, but I was really struck by how much people just love their plants. But at the same time, I was kind of struck and dismayed by how all these unsuccess stories that people had. They came into the nursery, well, this plant didn't do very well. Help me figure out what happened. Like, oh, wow. And I realized that a lot of times people's problems with their plants, they just didn't have all the information. So at that moment, after the first couple months working at that nursery, I discovered, well, this is my new life mission in life, is to ensure your success with plants. So that's my whole thing that I do. And what I identify is what I call gaps. So my life is to fill gaps. And I noticed way back then, the first thing where there's a huge gap between what people know and what they could know had to do with orchids. Because people just didn't know. And this is, again, like in the 90s, and still to this day, a lot of people just don't understand that orchids are different. There's nothing wrong with them. You know, there's nothing difficult. They're just different. Like, here's this Phalaenopsis orchid. And some people are, oh, that's an orchid, okay. Well, what about, like, say, the cyclamen? What kind of plant is a cyclamen?
An orchid, maybe.
It's just a cyclamen, right? You can say, oh, it's a holiday cyclamen, whatever. But if this was a Phalaenopsis plant, everybody'd have one in their home. But because it's called a Phalaenopsis orchid, you know. But anyway, so that's the whole point of this book here, because I realized, who was I talking to about the title of classes? Was I talking to you?
Yeah.
So this nursery I worked at, we had classes on orchids, and people would show up, and I thought, we were doing this class a year called, again, this is in Washington State, How to Winter Over Your Begonias, Fuchsias, and Geraniums. That's why I moved here. We don't have classes on that. But I asked somebody, they were sitting right in the front row, like, how did you hear about the class? And she said, well, I just typed into my computer how to overwinter my fuchsia basket, and this class came up, and it came right in that flash, in my light bulbs and dollar signs in my head, like, wait a minute, why don't we just call these classes what people want to know? And with this orchid class coming up, I thought, why don't we just call it How Orchids Rebloom? Because that's all people want to know. You don't want to know how to grow the things, you just want to get it to rebloom. And like 80 people showed up. I was like, okay. And so that was like a really popular class that I did for years, and then after a time, people said, well, you have to write a book about it. And one of my clients, I went to his home, he was a retired actor from Greece, and he said, you need to write a book about it, but write it the way you say it. Don't write it in British. So I don't know, he was European, I don't know what that means, but anyway. So that was the point of this book here. And a lot of what I do in this book and the new book is I do what I call gardening slogans. There are these orange boxes in the book. If you just read the orange boxes and look at the pictures, you'll learn way more than anybody else about orchids. But anyways, the other thing that's in that book is that almost every chapter has a lot of questions and answers afterwards. Because I find that in dealing with people, if you can hear other people's questions, you'll learn it more or better. And so, each chapter at the end will have like a question and answer section. So far over the years, there's only been like one question I got that was not in that book. And like somebody had emailed me right after the book had came out, and she said, well, Chuck, I'm really liking your book. I think I'm really understanding it. What do I do when my orchid's done blooming? And I said, keep reading. Chapter 7 is called, What Do I Do When My Orchid's Done Blooming? I mean, I know what you're going to ask, so the questions are in there. And, but anyways, part of this, the purpose of this book, again, is to fill gaps in what people don't know and what they could know. I don't like the word should, but what they could know. The other part of the purpose of this book is it's part of my retirement plan. So a couple of years ago, I thought, well, it'd be neat to do another book, because that really like exhausted me. That took years, because I did all the layout and everything, all the photos. I'm like, okay, well, and a couple of years ago, I thought, well, it'd be neat to do another book. But what would it be about? I don't want to wait 7 years. That takes too long. So I thought, what if I just republish all my old articles? Because I had been a gardening columnist years ago. I had hundreds of articles. When I read them, I was like, yeah, that's not really how I write anymore. So instead, what I thought, well, why don't I just write a bunch of short chapters on my perspectives of plants based on me talking to you. So this whole book here is your fault. So the idea is that this is just what I talk to about people all day. And so if somebody buys the book, and I go back to their home and they ask me a question, I say, well, as you read in chapter 4, because if you buy the book, you're accountable for the information. So if you meet me, I'm going to ask you questions. Anyway, but
there's a test.
Yeah, there'll be. I don't like that word either.
Okay.
But anyway, the whole point of this book then is to provide a bunch of short chapters of my own perspectives on how to talk about plants. And so the subtitle of the book is called And Other Lesser Known Perspectives from the World of Plants. Now, if that would be a suitable book title, that's what I called it. But I thought, what am I going to call this book? It's just a bunch of little short chapters that, well, I've seen what other people do. Let's just get the jazziest sounding chapter and call it that and say, And Other Lesser Known Perspectives from the World of Plants. So that's kind of what that's about. And the purpose of the book, is to inform you, hopefully entertain you a little bit, because part of what I did is I put all my garden jokes in that book. Because in this country, if you copyright a book or publish a book, all the information is copyrighted. Whereas in certain European countries, if you publish a book, you still have to copyright the information separately. That way, because I have a friend that she does class, she says, I'm going to steal that one, Chuck. I said, no, you're not. It's in the book. No, it's okay if you use my jokes. It's fine. But the other thing is dispel a lot of misinformation. Because I go to people's homes, I'm talking to them, and they say things back to me. And part of it is how we use words. And some of the things we'll talk about, if we're a little too vague with our words, people can take it all kinds of ways. Like expression I heard earlier is take over. What does that mean if somebody tells you that? Or the expression, oh, this plant likes to dry out. Or this one needs to be cut back. What does that mean? I mean, you know how many different ways that could be interpreted? So one of the things I like to do is to instill a certain amount of precision in how we use words. And I'm not a stickler for how you use words. You can name plants whatever you want. But if we're talking about, helping people, you're part of the Horticultural Society. So your friend at the end of the cul-de-sac thinks you're a de facto gardening expert, and you got to be ready how to talk to them about the plants. So that's part of my thing, is to help people talk about plants so that you can help other people yourself. Because part of my, business motto is to put myself out of business. so that everybody knows everything they need to know about plants. You don't have to call anyone to come to your home. You just go to your monthly meeting. You do everything yourself. And my job is to put myself out of business. I actually think that should be the government's job. I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon. Let's create a society where we don't need that. Anyway, so what we will talk about then is this book and a lot of other things. And again, the more questions you ask, I think we'll learn a lot more. When I was in graduate school in the 90s, early 90s, I was part of a program where there was this one professor that was really as like an educator. He stopped doing research and he was into education. And I was chosen with a few other students where we're going to do this new education model with introductory biology, like freshman level classes. And the idea was that there's this new thinking on education where that students would learn a lot more sitting around a table hashing out a problem amongst themselves than having some guy stand up in the front and just talk for 45 minutes. And it was amazing. I was really glad to be part of that. So the same thing applies here. The more questions you ask and more we have like a discussion, you'll likely learn more. And of course, I don't mind standing up here and talking. I could talk till probably 5, 6 o'clock tonight or even longer, but we will keep it brief.
Thank you.
Anyway, so any class that I do, I always talk first about how to know your plant. And that's actually the first chapter in this book is called the Know Your Plant. And the idea is that plants are so diverse. Like look at all the plants on that table, look at the plants here. They're all different. And I like to compare this to your family doctor. How many species do they deal with? So yeah, you gotta know something about your plant because they're all different. And right off the bat, what I always tell people is to be careful what you read on the internet. You know, not because like somebody's evil-minded that might be there, but there's no peer review. You know, people are just putting all kinds of stuff, like those garden blogs on the internet. I don't read that stuff. It's like poison for your mind. If some sentence you read on a garden blog gets stuck in your head, you might not remember that that came from some garden blog with no peer review. But you just really have to be careful. The classic one I get is I go to somebody's home and, you know, everybody loves hydrangeas, right? You know, oh, I wanted my hydrangea flowers to be this big. And I looked on the internet and it didn't work. What do I do? I say, first of all, where'd you look on the internet? So let's say it was like the University of Georgia. You know, they have that wet stuff like we're getting today, but it doesn't, you know, it happens more in the summer. I said, well, okay, but otherwise move to Coronado Island. They love spending money on water there. But no, actually I have pictures on my phone of pop-up sprinklers in the sand, watering the beach in Coronado Island. I have pictures of that. It's like, okay. Anyway.
Too much
So,
money.
what?
Too much money. They have a lot of money.
No comment. So anyway, so knowing your plant. There are things you can look up, but the best source of information will always be like local source of information. Like if your county has a horticultural society and you have a monthly meeting with a guest speaker, you know, something like that.
Yeah.
That works.
Yeah. Or, you know, of course, Walter Anderson Nursery, they have classes every Saturday at 9:30. You know, so you can always go to that too. But local sources of information will always be best. So there's two notions I like to impress upon people that you won't just read about. Well, you can read about it in here and in there. But the idea is, one, you want to know what is the growth habit of your plant? Like what does it do over the course of 1 year? You have to know that. Then the other thing to know something about is what is the native habitat like for that plant? So we'll talk about that for a second. So one, you have to know something about the growth habit of the plant. What does it do over the course of the year? Like we mentioned over there, cyclamen. Cyclamen. So what's the growth habit of this plant? What's it going to look like in the summer? Yeah, not much. So I had a client, went to her home one time, I think it was like the end of May, and we were talking about some things. She goes, oh, you know, back in February we bought this plant for my daughter's birthday and it died. I was like, well, what was it? She said, I don't remember what the name was. I said, what did it look like? She said, well, it had this stalk and like this yellow cup flower, and we bought it in like February. Why are you laughing? I didn't finish yet. Yeah, so I go, was it a daffodil? She goes, oh yeah. So what do you think that's going to look like at the end of May? What's a daffodil going to look like?
Non-existent.
Yeah, but to somebody that didn't know that, what do they think they're going to think? That they killed the plant. It's just lack of information about the growth habit of that plant. You just have to know that. Or one of my favorite native plants, the coastal sage. What does this look like in August?
Horrible.
Horrible? What do you mean? Yeah, it looks pretty dead. And to somebody that just moved here, Where did you all say you moved here from?
Glendale.
Illinois?
No.
Glendale.
Yeah, anyway, so, but yeah, not knowing that, a lot of people move to other parts of the country. I've lived, like, I'm from Chicago originally, I lived in Washington State, I lived in Hawaii. But yeah, this plant is gonna look pretty dead to most people that don't realize, well, in our climate, some plants lose their leaves in the summer. So anyway, that's the growth habit of the plant. The other thing you wanna know about is if you can differentiate between the youngest and oldest leaves on a plant. And why is that important? Well, because it gives you a powerful tool to assess the health of the plant. Like take this Gaillardia here. It's not exactly obvious just looking at it which leaf is the youngest and oldest. You kind of have to look around at the individual shoots, and the individual shoot, the new leaf comes out of the middle and the older leaves are on the outside. Whereas something like this plant, it's pretty easy. This coprosma, the new leaves are at the top, the bottom leaves are at the base of a given stem. Well, why is that important? Well, if somebody shows me a yellow leaf off a plant and says, what's wrong with my plant? I say, well, where'd the leaf come from? They say, well, it's down at the bottom. Well, there may be nothing wrong at all, you know? Like I'll go to somebody's home and they have this nice big bushy tomato plant, lots of tomatoes. And they go, why are all these yellow leaves at the bottom? It's like, because you haven't picked them off yet. You know, pick them off, you know? But anyway, but if you have a plant in which the new growth looks damaged, discolored, disfigured in some way, of course, none of these plants from Walter Anderson Nursery would look that way. But if you see that, that clearly means you have to do something different. You have to do something different. If the new growth doesn't look right, something's not right. Well, how do we know what that is? Well, I'll get to that in a second. So, but yeah, assessing the youngest and oldest leaves on the plant, that gives you a tool to assess the health of the plant. The other thing to know something about is that some leaves are what they call compound, meaning they're composed of many leaflets. Like the plant over there, the senna, that's a compound leaf. Or if you have a fern, like that Kimberly Queen fern or Boston fern, if you get a few leaflets that turn yellow, the whole leaf's gonna, turn yellow. And people have this fern and see like 3 leaflets on the ground and think the plant's dying. Well, it's just one leaf shedding, that's all. But again, that's knowing something about the growth habit of the plant. The other thing is know something about the native habitat of the plant, like where you find it in nature. Not what country the plant's grown in, although maybe plants should be concerned about that these days, but what does the native habitat look like? We talk about orchids. There are orchids that live in the Arctic Circle. There are orchids that live in trees in the understory of a tropical forest. There are orchids that live entirely underground in Australia. That's just their native habitat. And you have to know something about that. Why is that? Well, the second thing that I talk about then is the goal of gardening, and that's actually the second chapter in this book. And actually, I forgot, it's on your handout. Did everyone get the Botany for Gardeners handout?
Yes.
So what I just said is on that handout at the beginning, and there's a box there. And again, this is one of my gardening slogans. I thought, those like quantum physicists that want to come up with like one equation to explain everything that happens in the universe. I thought, well, could we do that for gardening? Could we have like the universal theory of gardening? Well, we have it. It's at that box on your handout there. So the goal of gardening, everything that you do in gardening is to reproduce the native habitat of your plant, to get the desired growth habit of the plant while having fun. If you're not having fun, you're inherently doing something improperly, right? Okay. So let's say that again. So the goal of gardening is to reproduce the native habitat of your plant to get the desired growth habit while having fun. So what is that? You say, well, give me an example. Well, the classic one would be like a camellias and azaleas. What do we know about them? Let's say you want to get a new camellia or azalea at Walter Anderson Nursery. You go in there and hopefully you get a good salesperson. They say, well, you need this. What are they going to try to sell you? Yeah, some kind of, I heard a few things, but yeah, something that would be an amendment or a fertilizer for an acid-loving plant, meaning the soil in their native habitat has an acidic pH. So it's not like some professor at the University of Connecticut did some study back in the 40s, and if we have a pH this low, then actually we get more, but no, we just know that in their native habitat, that's what's happening. And that's why certain plants don't do as well here, or I should say look as well, like Japanese maples. They tend to not look as good for most people because this is not Japan. Some things that are native Japan grow here okay, like Camellia japonica. Wow, when I moved here, I didn't expect to see camellias here. I was pretty surprised. Anyway, so that's the goal of gardening, to reproduce the native habitat of your plant to get the desired growth habit. Well, what does that mean, desired growth habit? Well, for orchids, all we're concerned about is getting the thing to rebloom. So that's all that matters there. And for most people, the goal of gardening is to get your plant to flower. But can you think of an example of any kind of gardening where you really don't like to see your plant flower? How about your lettuce?
Yeah.
or your cilantro or your parsley. And it's like, oh, it's gonna fade now. So there's a chapter called bolting in the new book that talks about that. So bolting only refers to short-lived plants. So like a perennial plant doesn't bolt, and like penstemon could have leaves at the bottom and makes the flowers, and that's not really bolting. Bolting is a plant saying, I want to die now. And so if you have a plant that bolts right away, that means it's not very happy. And if you're buying plants at a nursery like 6 packs of spinach, make sure they're not bolting. And that's very common to see that. One of the things I deal with a lot, as we'll mention in this book, the other big gap that's out there is people growing their own food. That's another one that I do a lot of helping people with because, not to say it's lost knowledge, but there's a huge gap between what people could know and what they are knowing and what they're doing. And there's a lot of unsuccess stories with vegetable gardening. We'll talk more about that in the time that's allowed. So, any questions so far? Yes?
I thought that the goal of gardening was to impress your neighbors.
No, that's this. We're trying to get Knucklehead to shut up and make our plants okay. That's the point. If you think that's your point of gardening, well, that's fine, but I wouldn't call that gardening.
He set me up.
Yeah. Well, you've heard me talk before, right? Have I seen you somewhere before? No. What garden club are you in? Are you in like a neighborhood
I'm
garden?
ex-president of this one.
But I mean, are you in like a neighborhood or city garden club?
Mission Hills.
I am.
Mission
I
Hills.
heard you,
Hills,
but I
we're
like
gonna
you.
go to
Okay. Yeah, Mission Hills.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I've seen you at that garden club.
I guess so. I don't know.
Okay.
He got kicked out of Mission.
Oh, let me get mine.
That's not big stuff, and I let him know.
All right. So that's the goal of gardening. So that's really the first two chapters out of here. The third one talks about what the gardening slogans that I was telling you about, which I have all throughout the book, which are these little like gray colored boxes. They're not in color to keep the cost down. But anyways, the next chapter talks about gardening slogans. There are things you've been told that are not universally true. The classic one is, what would happen right now if you went out and pruned your azalea or your camellia? You miss all the flowers for next year, right? Mm-hmm. So what's the rule of thumb about when to prune a camellia or azalea or most trees and shrubs? When do you prune them?
After they bloom.
Right after they're flowering. But would you say that applies to everything?
No.
What would it not apply to?
Fruit trees.
Fruit trees, yeah, classic example. Like I went to somebody's home, she's like, I'm having trouble with my tomatoes. Oh, well, what are you doing? Well, I'm pinching off the flowers so that I get more tomatoes. Okay, moving on. So, but yeah, there are a lot of things you're told, and again, I mentioned earlier, the way things are worded is so open to interpretation that you have to be careful what you hear. When somebody says, well, that plant really likes to dry out. I mean, that's going to be something a lot different to somebody from Scottsdale and somebody from Seattle. How do you interpret that? Or cut this perennial back. Well, to what? To the ground, 2 feet? So make sure that when you're getting information, that you have a good picture in your mind of what that means. Like, one of the things I study the last few years is how humans use words. And there's some older people, like some older writings from the 30s and 40s that I've been studying. And what's really interesting is that here we talk about gardening and nature, right? This is a totally complex, interwoven system of plants and microorganisms and soils and all this different stuff. And here we are as humans trying to impose this linear order of syntax and grammar upon it. Yeah. And that's going to not be that easy. So our responsibility is to make sure when these words are being used that we really understand what they mean. Because a lot of times the problems that we have, like these things I've been studying, is that a lot of people put the emphasis on the meaning of the word and not the emphasis on the meaning of the word as intended by the speaker. Like the word like fast could mean something that's quick, somebody not eating, or colors that don't fade. That's quite a variety. Of course, in the context we can learn things, but just be aware of that. If something doesn't make sense to you, that's why you got this. Make sure it makes sense. And, when we say to ourselves, like, what does it mean when I understand something? Usually what that means is I can put it into words. So let's get it down in black and white. But remember, those words are limiting. They can't fully describe everything. Like the word red isn't red. The word water, you're not going to get wet from the word water as if you walked outside. Or the guy that I've been studying, he came up with the expression called the map is not the territory. You don't go to a restaurant, order a menu, and eat the menu. They're just words. Or like I helped somebody at their house, he showed me this picture. They went out in the desert, and it was a Cesalpinia pulcherima. And I said, well, that's sometimes called the Mexican bird of paradise. And he goes, well, that doesn't look like any bird of paradise I've ever seen. Well, he's putting the emphasis on the meaning of the word and not what I intended. It's just a name. Like the plant over there that somebody said was called Medusa's head. Okay, so there's a euphorbia called Caput medusae, meaning head of Medusa. That's not that plant. That's Euphorbia inermis. And then the Caput medusae looks totally different. And the bracts on the Caput medusae are yellow. That one probably has white bracts. We call them flowers. Euphorbias have bracts that are colorful. But again, it's just how the words get used. And it's up to you to delineate that stuff. Because it's not always going to be obvious. So that's, again, part of the essence of this book is to help you kind of see through the clouds. Anyway, so let's move on to some other parts of the book. So this book has 4 sections. One is called Basic Gardening. That's what I've been telling you about so far. There's another section called Basic Botany, then Edible Plants, and Plant Problems. Why is that? Again, I just tried to group all the chapters into something that'd be easy for people to think about. And again, it's just stuff that I often say all the time. So in Basic Gardening, we talked about Know Your Plant, the goal of gardening. There's another chapter called Disposable Home Decorations. There's another chapter called The Eye. So this is one that a class that I often do for garden clubs is called How to Combine Color and Texture in a Garden and Landscape. And what the class really is how to teach you to have the eye. You know, people say, oh, you just have an eye for that. You know, and people say that, like I work with chess, like the 4-year-old chess prodigy, they were just born for that and have no hope of achieving that. You know, like the violin prodigy. That's not how things are. So you can learn to have an eye to make eye-popping, car-stopping plant arrangements so that your neighbor's having car accidents in front of your house taking pictures. So anyways, that's what this chapter is called, The Eye. It's a systematic way to come up with eye-popping combinations, because a lot of people just get overwhelmed. So if we have more time, I might demonstrate that, but let's move on. So the next one's called Basic Botany. And so that was something we're going to talk about a bit today, is Botany for Gardeners. This is a class that I often do for garden clubs, or like at Walter Anderson Nursery, I've done it a couple times. And the idea is like, well, why do we have a class called Botany for Gardeners? Why can't we just have like a gardening class? Why is this botany thing separate? Or as I mentioned in the book, a lot of the universities, the botany department is very far away from the horticulture department. A lot of universities. Why is that? Well, you know, they don't see things the same way. So in order to understand it, there's a chapter in here called The Difference Between Botany and Gardening. If you want to understand that difference, you want to understand the difference between botanists and gardeners. So I'll read you some of this here. So for starters, gardeners tend to have more worn hands and perhaps dirt under their fingernails, while botanists have cleaner, more pristine hands. In terms of attire, gardeners tend to wear more colorful clothes, whereas a botanist's attire tends toward earth tones like olive and khaki. So, you like that one?
Yeah, I like that one.
Okay. Gardeners prefer hats with a very functionally relevant wide brim, whereas botanists settle for hats with a smaller brim on average. Gardeners tend to use shorter words you can understand. Botanists, however, seem to prefer larger words that often resemble those found in the ingredients label on a package of hot dogs. So, all kidding aside, I'm not actually kidding, there is a difference. In one sense, the point of botany is to learn things, while the point of gardening is to go to the nursery and spend money. Anyways, so botany, tends to be more of a mental activity, the goal of being, what did you learn? And gardening tends to be the more physical activity and say, what have you accomplished? What have you done? And so botany represents theory, the why we do things, and then gardening represents practice and how we do things. And this explains partly why botany and horticulture is on separate sides of the university. But when we find out, really, these two things actually go together like heads and tails on a coin. You can't have one without the other. So, and I like to tell people, again, they're just words. It's all the same thing. Like as heads and tails are just a coin, botany and gardening together means caring for your plants. You need some botany to know why you're doing those things you're doing. If you ever met people that all they do is read about gardening and never do any of it, it's like some employees at certain nurseries. But you have to get out there and do it. Get out there and do it. And I even say in this book, trial and error is not an invalid way for learning about plants. But after a while, if you have enough compassion for your plants, you say, I don't want to do a bunch of trial and error, I better go learn about these things. So Anyways, so that's kind of a difference between botany and gardening. So on your handout, there's a few things, like I think 3 main subjects, and botany can go wherever you want. The 3 things you want to kind of understand as the nuts and bolts behind what you could learn about gardening. On your handout, it's taxonomy, how plants get named, the parts of a plant, and then how a plant actually works, like physiology. And we could spend, lots of time just on that alone. Like taxonomy, there's a formal way to name plants, and then there's any way to name plants. If you want to call your plant Bob, that's fine. But if we have like for instance, on your family, genus, and species, the word family gets used in all kinds of ways. Like today, I heard the word family being used, and you could instead use the word genus, like the family Senecio. Well, that's a genus, not a family, in a botanical sense. But you can call it whatever you want. But most people use the word family in gardening mean group. And that's fine, like this family of roses. Well, okay. But in a botanical sense, family has a certain designation. And again, we don't have to be stickler about words, but remember, like this guy that I've been studying from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, what his main shtick was that how is it that humans can make all these advancements in science and technology, yet humans don't seem to advance very far in the realm of human relations? Now, why is that? It's because in the technological things, the words have precise meanings and they're used a certain way. But in human relations, again, these words just have all kinds of meanings. And if we put too much importance on the word and not the individual using the word, we can get all kinds of tangles and difficulties on that. So, but that's why with the naming of plants, if you don't care about it, so what? But if you want to talk, like if you want to get up there and talk about your plant, you might want to know the name of it, just so you can tell other people so that they can go buy one for themselves. Anyway, so that's taxonomy, parts of a plant. I say this because some people don't realize, like we mentioned euphorbia, those are bracts, not flowers. There are a lot of plants that have colorful leaves that are excellent in the garden landscape for color. It doesn't have to be just flowers. Or there's a chapter in this book called Most Edible Roots Are Underground Stems. I think it says many. So many things you think is a root, like ginger root. It's not a root. Or a potato. What happens if you leave the potato? It grows roots and shoots. So those are underground stem or stem bases. But again, knowing the parts of the plants can help you learn how to take care of them or what the plant's doing. And then how a plant works. Again, we could have a whole class just on that. One of the things is xylem and phloem. Xylem's how the water goes up and down the plant, and the phloem's how the plant transports sugars. In true trees, the phloem's around the outside in the cambium layer. That's why you can girdle a tree just by taking a knife and going around it. Some trees actually survive that. But a palm tree, that's not going to work, because it's not an actual tree that has the phloem around the outside. It's just grouped differently. And again, those kind of things can help you, especially when you're assessing like a sick plant. Or of course, none of yours. Say your neighbor comes over with a sick plant, to help them figure out what it is. So anyways, and then on the back of the handout, there's some helpful things that, words. So common prefixes, like, let's see, like microphylla. If species next salvia microphylla or something means small leaf. But then there's all these like suffixes and like anything that says ensis at the end, like floridensis means it's native to Florida. And there's like common, and then the colors. You can learn a lot from a plant just by the botanical name. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes they just name it after somebody, like Douglasii, named after some guy named Douglas. But they're all the colors, like the one that was over there, the lutea, that aloe. Lutea means yellow. If you ever saw something lutea, it means it has yellow flower. Anyway, okay. So, any questions still? You very settled? All right. Let's move on. Yes?
Why is the strawberry not a fruit?
We haven't got there yet.
Oh.
No, yeah, we're definitely going to talk about that. You're not leaving here not knowing the answer to that question. All right. So, what's next? So, basic botany. Another thing I like to mention is a chapter called Fertilizer is Not Food for a Plant. What's photosynthesis? Just generally speaking, what's photosynthesis?
Conversion of light into energy.
Sun.
Light into sugar?
Well, it's using the light energy to convert carbon dioxide into sugar. Carbon dioxide in the air, not in the ground. So how's fertilizer food if the plant gets its food from the air. You'll have to read about that.
It's the soil. You're feeding the soil.
You're feeding the soil. So the last chapter in this book is called Living Soil, and I predict that someday you go to Walter Anderson Nursery, maybe not in our lifetimes, but there'll be a corner on the wall that will say, grow your own soil. And you'll treat your soil like it's this plant. And you'll add amendments to make the soil grow. And people will see their soil as like this living thing and not something that gets stuck on your fingernails. Anyways, that might be a while, but I'm holding out for it. Okay, so the other thing, in basic botany, I talk about how to name plants, and then I talk about the top 5 familiar flowering plant families. Say that really fast. But in that, there's a lot of big plant families. You'd be surprised how many different plants you're totally aware of are in the rose family, or in the mint family, or in the legume family. There's quite a few. Like the rose family includes all the stone fruits, peaches, plums, cherries, pears, apples, strawberries, and all kinds of perennials, all kinds of things. Or like the mint family, you know, rosemary, lavender, oregano, sage, anything salvia, all that stuff. Okay, and then the last one in basic botany, annual versus perennial. You go, oh, I know that one. Oh, do you? So what about this? What's this? What is this here? Is this annual or perennial?
Perennial.
Annual? Annual or perennial? It depends on where you are. And you're not going to find these much in a nursery in the 4th of July, right? They're grown here as winter annuals, but they are perennials. If you go up to British Columbia, Canada, this is a summer annual. If you go to Portland or Humboldt County, that's a perennial. It's just, if it's too cold, it doesn't like it. If it's too hot, it doesn't like it. So it depends on where it is. Like, or how many people have the plant called bear's breeches in your garden? What does that do in the summer? It goes dormant, right? Well, where I live in Bellingham, Washington, it's the opposite. It grows all summer, goes dormant in the winter. It just depends on where you are. So a lot of plants in most of this country where there's frost, a lot of plants of solar annuals are shrubs. You know, like geraniums, fuchsias, those are shrubs. You know, and most people don't realize that, or heliotrope. You know, I didn't know that. Well, I knew it when I looked it up, but years ago, I thought this cute annual called heliotrope. Oh, that's a bush, you know. Anyway, so the other thing that I mentioned then, in knowing botany is there's the one family called the Asteraceae, the aster family. And so there's a lot of misconception about that one in terms of what is one flower. So you all know what this plant is? You know what kind it is? So these are called gardenias. And gardenias are a type of Gerber that have a smaller flower, but have a flower every day of the year, all the time. Even if you're like pretty neglectful, it's amazing how tough these plants are. But this is a gardenia. And so this is in the aster family as well as this gaillardia. So, how many flowers am I showing you?
One.
A bazillion, right? You knew that. Okay, so let's kind of look at this. So anything in the family Asteraceae, the old name is called Compositae, which means the Latin put together. So the idea is that this head or composite is a put together of many flowers. It's an assemblage of many flowers, and there are two kinds in this one. The outer one here, this is called a ray floret, which is composed of 5 petals fused together, typically, in the Asteraceae. That's one flower. For many members of the family Asteraceae, like a sunflower, the ray florets or ray flowers are sterile. They might provide pollen, but often they're sterile. They don't do anything. But the one in the middle are called disc florets. And instead of having 5 petals arranged in a strat or a ligule, these are arranged in a column. So these are called disc florets. Like that one plant that's a Senecio over there is a member of the Asteraceae that lacks ray florets, that is only disc florets, which many Senecio are like that. They don't have ray florets. So I'll pass these around. And what this will look like is, have you ever seen marigold seeds? But these are actually the flowers. I'll just pass these around a little bit. So there are two kinds of, there are 2 kinds of flowers. There are ray florets and disc florets. And when somebody says, how many flowers is this? Well, I don't know. Let me take out my magnifying glass and count. You have a couple hours. But anyway, so that's just something interesting to know about the family Asteraceae.
That Artemisia is one too.
Yeah, the Artemisia's in the Asteraceae. What else? The gaillardia. Anything that's got a daisy-type flower like marigolds, dahlias, zinnias, all those things. But then there are other things you might not think of, like that Artemisia. Like there are two kinds of what they call sage. There's salvia sage, that's in the mint family. Artemisia sage, that's in the aster family. Does that matter? It does to me. Anyway. So moving on, edible plants. This is important. So how many people are trying to grow any kind of food at home, even just one fruit tree? All right, good. I forgot to ask this too. How many people are new to gardening? Meaning you've been gardening less than 20 years. Anyway, so edible plants. So I like to ask people, because again, we're talking about words and how we use them. What does edible actually mean? I mean, I know what plant means, but what's edible plant? Well, as far as I can tell, at least in this country, the definition of edible is something you can eat and not immediately fall over dead. And as long as there's a little gap in time between you eat something and feel sick, you can blame it on something else. Anyway. So one of the things to talk about is the differences between vegetable gardening and landscaping, because this is a big deal. Like I do a lot of volunteering at community gardens, and I see this where people are just copying what their neighbors did in their front yard in their vegetable garden. And that just doesn't always work. So what do you think? What are some of the differences between vegetable gardening and landscaping?
Well, vegetables are temporary.
Okay, well, that's a good one. Vegetable garden plants are temporary. So what does that mean? You're taking them out after a short period of time. So what that leads to, you do not want to use bark and wood chips as a mulch in a vegetable garden, because you're going to mix it into the soil when you take those temporary plants out. And that's just going to create a dry pocket, or the microorganism is going to need the nitrogen to break down that stuff. But you don't want wood chips and bark chips in your vegetable garden. Some of those planting mixes that are out there are designed for breaking up clay to plant a tree or a shrub, not a vegetable garden. So when you're getting, vegetable garden soil, it should be very finely textured. And I used to bring soil is what I learned. Well, I should just bring the bags. So if you have a vegetable garden, you get this soil booster stuff. So this is a soil amendment for vegetable gardens because it's ground up really fine. It says it's got extra chicken manure or something, but it's the texture that's the key aspect of it. The other soil they have that works great in a vegetable garden is called Recipe 420. What's that mean? But anyway, that soil also is ground up really fine, but it has all kinds of stuff added to it. So, but yeah, in a vegetable garden, you don't want to use chunky stuff in the soil, and you don't want to use chips and things as a mulch. You just want to use compost so that you can till it in when you replace stuff. Because, like radishes, how long are they going to be in there? Less than 2 months. Lettuce, less than 3 months. It's pretty quick. So what are some other differences between vegetable gardening and landscaping? You had your hand up.
The purpose.
What do you mean the purpose?
Why you're doing it.
Well, what do you mean? You got to come to my class on edible landscapes in 2 weeks. At the Bridger Bay Garden Club, November 24th on a Monday, I'll do a class on edible landscapes. What usually people are getting when you say that, the purpose of a landscape is to look beautiful. Well, not if I do your vegetable garden for you. No. But a vegetable garden could look just as good as any landscape. Why can't the landscape be edible? And that doesn't mean, oh, honey, let's tear out the front lawn and put in a pumpkin patch. No, you can have edible hedges, you can have edible border plants like this lettuce. I mean, wouldn't lettuce look just as cool as like border flowers, like pansies or something? So anyways, what other differences are there between vegetable gardening and landscaping? Yes?
You often grow plants for the foliage, not the flowers.
Yeah, that could be too. I mean, but there are a lot of gardens that you see that they're just growing foliage plants, no flowers. What are some other differences? Yeah?
Pest management, maybe?
Well, you still managing pests in a landscape as in a garden, right?
I just mean birds coming in. And
You still could get that in your landscape, right?
I suppose you could.
Yeah. What are some actual differences, for sure?
You're gonna eat
Watering?
Yeah.
Yes, one is for a year, and then landscaping lasts many years.
Right, and that's like what Donna was saying, is that the vegetable gardening plants are temporary, unless you only grow annuals. Yeah, they're temporary. You're taking them out and replacing them. For the sake of facilitation, I will continue. So one big deal is watering. I mean, unless you're just growing dragon fruit in your vegetable garden, you're going to be watering totally differently than your landscape. Usually you're watering more frequently, but for a shorter period of time in a vegetable garden, because you're watering more frequently. A lot of your vegetable garden plants don't have deep tap roots, like your Mediterranean plants in your landscape. So in your landscape, usually we say you water longer but less frequently. Vegetable garden's the opposite, especially if you just planted seeds. You might have to get there and water a little bit every day to keep that top layer of soil hydrated. The other thing that's different is that we mentioned the plants are temporary. Therefore, what you're buying at the nursery are babies. Landscaping plants are at least young adults or adults. So when you're buying landscaping plants, yeah, bigger's better. Now, some people might debate this. Oh, if you plant a small fruit tree in 10 years, you're going to have more fruit. Yes, but if you plant too small of a fruit tree, you say, well, I got 3 sons and they like to play football. We got 2 dogs and they're going to run over the plant. Or we live on a canyon, they're going to eat it. I need a bigger plant to start. But anyways, with vegetable garden plants, you've got to pick small ones because they're babies. So here's a lettuce mix and here's like a mesclun mix. You do not want to buy this. This is not going to perform very well. If you plant this, you will get way more food than this. Like I did a class once on tomatoes and somebody raised their hand, well, should I rough up the roots a little bit on my tomato plant? I said, if you have to do that, you shouldn't have bought it. And said, well, how do I know? Well, this is why you take it out of the pot. When the nursery buyers go to the grower, when they look at the plants, they take it out of the pot and look at the roots. That's too much. That means it's been in this thing too long. This is a carrier. This is not a pot to grow a plant. This is a carrier to get these seedlings from the growers to Walter Anderson in your car and in the ground as fast as possible. Like in the old days, when you went to the feed store to get your vegetable starts, you might see this bin of soil with a stack of newspapers and some spoons. You took the spoon and you put the newspaper around it and you went home and said, oh, honey, we'll plant that next weekend. No, you did not do that. So you have to treat this the same way. You get it out of that immediately. And because, again, we live in a really big metropolitan area, there are going to be plants that get missed. Like over at Walter Anderson Nursery, there are 4-inch pots of radishes for $5.99 a piece, and they got 3 or 4 radishes in them there. So that means it's $1.50 to $2 a radish. I would never do that. Like where I come from, you don't sell root crops in pots, except beets. But yeah, carrots and radishes, you never buy those in pots. But anyways, the point is, smaller is better with vegetable garden plants because they haven't been in the carrier that long. If they sit in here too long, they will not perform. And it's not to say they're stunted, but they're not going to perform. They're not going to die. But again, the idea is just to make lots of leaves to eat. You plant this in the ground, it's likely going to go to bolt really fast. You'll hardly get anything. So smaller is better. Or if you see those tomato plants that are this tall in a 4-inch pot, don't buy that. It's been in the pot too long. It might make a couple of tomatoes, but you want 50. You don't want 3. If you get 3 tomatoes, something's not right. Okay, so that's some of, okay, I guess I'll say this real quick. When it comes to soil amendments, where would you get soil amendments for a vegetable garden? Where are some of the places you go if you have a vegetable garden?
Great soil.
What?
Great soil.
Great soil? Like where would you get that?
Escondido.
Oh, okay, Escondido, yeah. A mushroom farm? Yeah, mushroom farms. Where else?
Out of my compost bin.
Yeah, out of your own compost bin. That's great. How many of you would go to the landfill to get the compost from there? What's this expression on your face? You don't look very happy.
I think they probably have chemicals and things that I wouldn't put in my organic garden at the landfill.
Does anyone disagree with that? Would you go to the landfill and get compost for your vegetable garden?
I haven't.
What?
I haven't.
I have.
What would you think if there was an organization saying you should do that?
Because Miramar does have compost.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
The landfill, yeah. Like, what would you think if an organization is telling you you should do that? Well, that's the Master Gardener of San Diego County. They are promoting people go to the landfill and get compost. Now, I've had 3 interactions with people from the Master Gardeners, and I grill them like, what are you talking about? I have the same reaction as Donna. Who in their right mind would think to do that? And after a few minutes, when they realize what they just said sounds pretty ridiculous, they come up with this. They say, oh, but you see, we deal with low-income people. What? I mean, all 3 of them said that.
Really?
Once I got to the point of that, why would you go to the Miramar landfill to get compost for your vegetable? I can see if you have a spot out in front of your house, you want to mulch some shrubs or something or whatever, but this, again, you have to be careful what you see out there. You know, use your mind. Does this make sense to you? It doesn't make sense to me. And the last person I talked to was from a garden club, and she said, well, I'm a master gardener, and this, yeah, you see, yeah, right, exactly. And she told me, but if you come to our garden club, you can't say that thing about the landfill compost. Oh, I'm gonna. And I'm going to do it to every garden club. I mean, I'm a truth seeker. That's at the bottom line of all of this. And again, my job is to put myself out of business so that you all have the truth and you don't need me anymore. Or, you know. Yes.
So, what's wrong with the landfill compost?
Chemicals and,
Your plants can't absorb most of that.
Well, I mean, Walter Anderson Nursery sells 12-month systemic. It works for 12 months. And it used to be Bayer, and then during the pandemic, they changed it to Bio Advance. And some of you might know as of January 1st, in this state, we can't use imidacloprid for household use. So the systemic is just not imidacloprid, it's something else. But the idea is that, yeah, I would say, well, how do you know what's in there?
Yeah.
They're not watching every bucket of stuff that comes out of a car and goes into that. And you have no idea. I mean, there could be lead paint. You know, I talked to one and said, oh, we saw a study. Well, where is it? They don't know. But here's the thing. If you're ever going to look at a study, again, I worked in research. There's 3 things you have to know. First, who funded the study, who collected the data, and what's the experimental design? Because a lot of studies out there are just anecdotal information that don't have replication and are not can't use statistical inferences. It's just totally invalid. Like, how many of you ever heard the story about how the dodo bird was hunted to extinction? And as a result of that, a plant went extinct on, was it Mauritius? There's a paper, you can look at it, it's from the 1940s and 50s. Well, 20 years later, this guy's like, well, wait a minute. You didn't even look at the north end of the island. That plant's totally there. And here's this study that for decades people believe was true. The guy hadn't even looked at the whole island. You know, like, anyway, moving on. So, edible plants. So I mentioned, let's talk about strawberry. So, a strawberry is not a fruit. And people say, what is it? Well, they wouldn't want to contest that point, first of all. Okay.
Wouldn't dare.
Yeah, yes. Anyway, so, the way to think about what a strawberry is, and again, because this is like in a technical botanical sense, we have to have some kind of like rigor to our definition. So, what is a fruit? A fruit is a covering of a seed that grows from part of the flower. That has to be the case. So, if you have like one of those podocarpus trees or a podocarpus hedge and you haven't trimmed it and you get those tan balls that fall off on your patio, that's not a fruit because podocarpus doesn't flower. So if a plant doesn't flower, it can't possibly make a fruit. But just because a plant is flowering doesn't mean it's gonna make fruit, like if it doesn't get pollinated or it's a sterile hybrid, something like that. So what is it then? Well, the way I think the best to explain what a strawberry is to explain a similar related fruit, a raspberry. If you all ever picked raspberries, or you've seen them, where you take the raspberry off the plant and you have this like hollow shell of little balls, and what's left on the plant is this post. And it goes on like this. So picture for a moment that post, and you'd swell up like a balloon. And then all these little balls of the raspberry shrunk down to little dots, and you put it back together. So you have a balloon with dots on the outside. That's a strawberry. So that post that's left on the raspberry plant is what they call the receptacle, where all the flower parts join together on a plant. That's the receptacle. And so a strawberry is a swollen receptacle with fruits dotted around the outside. So what we typically think of a seed on a strawberry is actually the fruit. So if you have like a stereo microscope and tweezers, you can go home, take the little thing off the strawberry and split it open, and it's inside there. The seed's inside that little thing stuck on the strawberry. So strawberry is not a fruit. I would say it's a collection of fruits dotted on swollen receptacle tissue. Tell your neighbors that one. So if that's the case, if a fruit is a covering of a seed that comes from a flower, you all know what a sunflower is, right? You've all eaten sunflower seeds. Where's the fruit? I mean, if it's a flower and you get a seed, there's got to be a fruit in there, right? Where is it? What's a sunflower fruit? What's that? The Wendy's, little old lady from Wendy's, like, where's the fruit?
Where's the
Where's the bee? Where's the fruit? So, again, for the sake of facilitation, it turns out that the sunflower seed with the shell on it is the fruit. So remember, a sunflower seed results from a disc floret. Remember these things we passed around? Sunflowers the same. The ray florets may or may not do anything, but the center, the disc florets, each disc floret or flower makes one fruit. That sunflower seed husk with the seed inside is one fruit. Okay, then how about this? How many people have a type of ficus at their home, like an edible fig or Indian laurel? What color are the flowers on your plant? What color are flowers on your plant? No flowers. What do you mean? It's a flowering plant, right? What color are the flowers on a ficus? I think you know where I'm going with this one. And you do too. So, yeah, I like to go into nurseries and I'll see, like, the figs are going to be in there soon with the bare root fruit tree. Like, yeah, I ask the employee, what color are the flowers on this one? Just see what they say. Why is this guy cracking up so much? It's because a fig is kind of like a strawberry or a sunflower inside out. A fig is a collection of flowers and fruits. The flowers and fruit are inside the fig. And so you're never going to see it unless you're like, oh, let's crack it open. Well, one time I was showing somebody this on the Indian laurels, which are sold all over the country as like indoor foliage plants. And there was the little like hard fig on there, and I cut it open. I explained to somebody, and something flew out of it. Like, wow. But yeah, so a fig is a breeding ground for fig wasps. There's always that hole in the middle. Females fly in there, they go around pollinate all the seeds and do their thing and fly away. But a fig is really just a breeding chamber for fig wasps. We did the radio show at Walter Anderson Nursery. Ken goes, or somebody said, well, wouldn't that mean then a fig's not vegan? I said, well, is it meaningful to look at the fruit as not being vegan, being removed from the soil in which it grows? In that case, where do you cut it apart? Like analysis means cutting into. Okay, you say the fig is not vegan or something, but it's growing in soil, which has certainly got life in it. Anyways, you had a question back there?
That's the black fig fly. Now that's probably what popped out of that fig, that juvenile fig.
Yeah, and the thing is, I don't think there are any of those fig wasps here, so who knows what gets in there. But it's just one of those fascinating things, again, that lesser known perspectives from the world of plants. So we better end soon. What else can we talk about? Okay, in the section on plant problems, one of the things to remember, there's a chapter called Correlation Does Not Imply Causation. Just because two events occur simultaneously doesn't mean one caused the other. The classic one in the next chapter is called Ants on My Plants.
I don't think I can have that.
So just because there are ants on your plants doesn't mean you need to kill the ants. Ants on your plants usually means that a sucking insect is present, like aphids, whitefly, mealybugs, scale. See ants on your citrus? There's sucking insects on there. Ants running up and down your palm tree, there are sucking insects up in the crown. And so one of the treatments for that, if you see ants, you're likely going to need neem oil. Neem oil is a control for sucking insects. It also works good on powdery mildew. Why do I use this? Because they're like insecticidal soap. You could probably use that. But I use neem oil a lot because neem oil won't affect the monarch caterpillars. We often use this. This is spinosad, or Captain Jack's dead bug. If you have citrus, you need to use something like this to control for the citrus leaf miners. If your leaves get all irregularly curled, you spray this stuff every 2 weeks on the new growth. As it comes out, you will not get citrus leaf miners. But if you spray this, you could harm the monarch caterpillars. You just have to be careful where you do it. Some of my clients are like really gung-ho addicted to that endeavor. And so we use neem oil. But also remember, neem oil is pretty toxic to like fish. If you have a fish, like I have a client with a Japanese garden with like this giant koi. We don't use this around that at all. But neem oil is an excellent thing. They put it in toothpaste. But it's an excellent organic control for sucking insects and powdery mildew. What else? Oh, I didn't mention this yet. So there's a chapter in there called Death by Overwatering. And again, this is one of those things where it has to do with how we use words if our intention is to help others succeed with their plants. I make the assertion it's impossible to overwater a plant. You can't do that. A plant's like 95% water. How could water be bad?
What about my root rot?
Why would the roots rot? Water's good. There's water in the roots. Why don't they just rotting right here?
Standing water.
All right, drainage.
Why do you need drainage? Water's good. Why don't we just put them all in the bathtub?
We
Fill
could
it up.
die if we have too much water. If we drink too much water, we could die.
No.
Yeah, again, you'd have to be as stupid as a fraternity guy to do such a thing. Those guys, they do that. It doesn't mean water's bad, though. This just means your knucklehead wasn't thinking right. Yes?
Does that mean that the water causes root rot in the soil by decaying the organic material there?
But why would that be bad for a plant?
Roots have to breathe.
Roots have to breathe. Roots require oxygen. So let me illustrate another way. You probably wouldn't do this today because it's raining, but if you have a swimming pool and you go home and sit at the bottom of your swimming pool for 3 or 4 hours, you wouldn't die from overwatering,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, the roots need air. So when we say, oh, this soil has to drain, what we're saying is this plant's roots have a higher demand for air than this plant over here. So like when you see cactus mix or succulent mix, they have all that pumice and perlite in it. It's not for the drainage, but again, yes, it does allow for drainage, but the idea is that water displaces air. And if you explain it to people that way, they're less likely to overwater their plant. My term I think is more relevant is under-airing or suffocating. If you water the plant too much, you suffocate the roots by excluding air, and then the plant suffers. It's not the excess of water, it's the lack of air that's causing that. And on that note, as they say in therapy, we have to stop for today. We should probably stop.
So good. So good. I'm going to stop this.